Now, we have just a couple of items that have surfaced in priority over the last week, which means that they're late-breaking, sudden changes in priority. But fortunately, they're not, I think, very heavy. They're not very hard. So we felt that it wasn't too big of a surprise to try to move in this direction for Magento Live Europe. Eric, do you want to go on?
Yeah, let's go ahead.
We've got.
Yeah, no worries. So James, would you mind filtering here on the label that is for grooming, so we can take a look at the items that we want for this week?
There we go.
Very good. So our goal for this afternoon. So by the way, hi everybody. And so we're going to get started here. So we're going to cover hopefully three major stories. The first one's a bit of a just minor edit from last week, but I do want to make sure everybody's aware of that. But then the other two get us into some interesting areas around configurable products and the pagination component, which I think will be the interesting one to tackle on the category page. And so if we take a look at the first one here, James, you don't mind, let's take a look at the implement order confirmation here, the very first one. This should be sorted.
There we go.
The notion of this is where we left off late on Friday. And so Anton had some really great feedback on really how to make this simple. And really, to make this simple is about creating just an email that gives you the password. And in that during that moment, with the current APIs, the account can be made. And so, of course, we're going to have a more robust create account experience. You'll click this, and that'll link up to some of the existing work, which is great. But to really make this independent from others, which I think was a great idea, the idea and the clarification that we made here, both in the assumptions and the task, were to create that account and then quickly be able to be sent an email about what that basically confirming that that's been done. And then you can verify in M2 that the account has been created. So that's really all there was. And so James, if you look at the bottom here real quick on the tasks, Anton had some specific feedback on the actual API itself. I guess there's an aspect here of the management interface that needs to be exposed. But then from that point, you could be able to send the mail. Although I do think it probably need to be a little bit of work on how to get the mail services spun up. So I added that also as a task, and then just verifying it, make sure that the account's created, and that's it. So we made this a fairly sizable story up front, but I think we've now simplified this into something that still gets that account created, but doesn't necessarily have to string together some of the things that we can cover in later stories. So yeah, just an update on that based on kind of the post grooming activities. But I wanted to open this up to the floor and see if there's any questions first, and then just confirm the estimate second to make sure that we've got a good understanding for this.
Alex ought to be familiar with the practice of taking an API interface and exposing it in the REST API. There's a pattern to it, so it's actually really straightforward to do. And if you need any assistance with it, whoever takes the story, there are a lot of experts, including some of our core architects, who can show you how most of the boilerplate and the plumbing is already set up. Alex, I know you know how to do it because you've done this before for us.
From API point of view, yeah, I did it.
Yeah, I'm not saying you have to do it. I'm just saying your estimate will be useful.
Oh, okay, good. Should we do estimate? Or
well, let's talk about the task.
Yep, okay.
No, not yet. Let's talk about the tasks. We need to understand what the REST API and the GraphQL API provide us.
From GraphQL, I can tell you directly nothing for now for this. We have to stick to Web API in any case.
Yes. And then we need to talk about what's feasible and what's possible after create account. And so there's one screen. I don't know if there's more. Is Samia here? Or did she have to take?
I'm here.
She's here. Yep.
Okay, yeah. Samia, this is part of the Envision thing that we just reviewed, but are there other screens to this, or are we just talking about implementing account creation in one click that sends an email?
Just one click here. We've got additional screens that we broke out under a separate story. We actually had some really good progress from the Bar Green folks implementing the basics of that this week for that. So just join into that. But again, in the interest of making this independent, this is just the creation of that. We'll probably want to do a follow-up story next week that actually does the join. But again, in the interest of making this brutally simple. It was a good notion last week about that by just using the email to do so, which I thought was a good idea.
Okay, so that means that we have one invocation of an API method to send an email, one invocation of an API method to populate the screen with order information and combined customer information, and then the UI implementation itself. I would suggest that we augment these tasks maybe with that, and I'll just start by doing that, and then I would say implement UI as playing order data, and then implement password.
One note
All right.
here.
Yes.
We want to display information about the order that was placed, right?
Mm-hmm.
I would say we have to store this data. On a step on a checkout, we already have all data we need. First of all, then we don't need an extra API call there because that data is already there because he submitted it. So we already have the all order information.
We do, but upon submitting an order, you receive confirmation that the order was accepted, and then other parts of the resource are updated. Perhaps an ID is created, perhaps a status is changed. So it may be the same object, and there's parts of it that can be reused. But for the sake of simplicity, I think we should view this as an entirely different call. Now, I know it's a PWA, so that seems inefficient, but from the UI developer's perspective, I don't want them to have to reuse state. I'd like them to just be able to do, I need the order.
Then I understand it, but then we have another problem. Order API for get order or get list of the orders is available only for admin token. You cannot do it per customer. You can do it only for like having admin access to the system.
Okay, so there are a couple of directions to go. First of all, my favorite baby, the upward backend specification, could be used to describe an integration that makes an administrative REST call and then passes a subset of the data. However, that's maybe a stretch. What we can do instead is say, identify as to-dos, identify, so discovery for REST API, GraphQL coverage, and then another task for identify admin only data endpoints with data customer would want to see for future adaptation.
That's good.
Yep, I know it's good. Now, it's a very good point. Let me show you something very briefly, and I won't take too long with this. Oh, no, that's not the right thing. Is there a different one? Yeah, I'll just show it to you in the terminal. There's a branch here of my integration branch of PWA Studio. I'll be quick, I promise.
No worries.
So as an example of the way that might be done, is this visible to you?
Yep.
The configuration here uses a Magento REST administration token as one of the standard headers, an authorization header that it sends with all of the requests that it sends to the Magento REST API. So in this case, there's an idea of stitching queries together with GraphQL. You can ignore that. But here you can see that we can obtain a Magento REST admin token and upward that then is lazily required by the headers, which are then lazily required by an API call, and then use backend environment variables to obtain that token. And then it gets stored in this top level context and then reused when creating a header. And then we can take API information, use the templates to strip it, or use GraphQL to trim it, and then send it along. That way we can expose an ad hoc endpoint, which does no logic but just does transformation and authorization to the client. The maturity of this is not quite there to do it. So I wouldn't suggest it for this story, but I think we can think about how we might expose future admin stuff while we are waiting for the GraphQL team to implement it that way.
Okay. Okay. I have a question, generally, from another dimension. I'm mostly the backend developer, not the front-end developer. But if you're talking about the JavaScript application, so the front-end application like PWA, if you load it in your browser, you can investigate the code generally. Can you find the token there if you're a developer?
Oh, no, what I'm showing you here is a description of server-side behavior.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. This describes the behavior of the backend for front-end server that just shows the app shell, and it could also. This is experimental code. I'm just showing you. It could also expose an endpoint which uses environment variables from its backend. And really, using admin username and password is not ideal in the first place. I just didn't want to go through the OAuth process in order to do my experiment. But in production, it would be OAuth, and it would be server-side only.
Good, then it's fine.
So now I'm getting that out of the way. Again, just showing you that future exposure of admin-only stuff is perhaps possible to do in a pinch without needing to wait for the GraphQL API. A front-end developer could potentially just edit a configuration file to do it. So anyway, since that's not there, I think we need to expose a task for identifying the information that's not there. It's just part of acceptance criteria, and then creating the REST API as a backend task. Implementing the UI that consumes that REST API is a front-end task, and password email as well. I think we're ready to roll the dice, but if anyone else has suggestions, corrections, or questions, I will stop talking.
What email after creating an account? Okay. I have a question. What is implemented password email after creating an account? That user get an email with a link to create a password?
Yeah, this might not be the right way to describe it. Implement API, implement UI interaction button to invoke API call that sends account creation email. Is that perhaps more clear?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. Okay, that silence tells me it's dice rolling time. So,
James, do we start with the one?
do we start with a 1?
Yeah, with an estimate. Yeah, we'll start off. We'll start off with that.
Oh, okay. So this is Price is Right.
Are we playing poker? So
Yeah,
I'll rise it then.
Yeah. Okay. So you raise. I'll knock on an 8.
Yep, I would raise it an 8.
Okay. Let's see. Around the table. Bargreen, you there? No. Eric.
If you say it's an 8, I say it. This one's pretty technical.
Yeah, gotcha. Do we have Jimmy on the line by chance? It's a little early for Jimmy. Art? Hi, Art.
You're muted. Okay. Do you hear him, guys? If he is talking like
I
this?
hear him a little bit, Art. I think that your microphone is you
Too
need
far
to.
away. Mhm.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So Kevnason against 8.
Okay. Then we'll call it an 8. And Eric, do we call it groomed?
I feel like it's groomed.
Oh, it's so groomed. Okay, we'll skip the massage and the second hair wash. It is groomed.
Make sure
Okay.
you click the up button,
The what?
the update button to make sure that the changes took.
Uh-oh. Well, it certainly looks like it's not here anymore. That's a little bit like it taking, right? Here, we'll make sure.
Yeah, it should be the first one there, 278.
Yep. Nope. Okay, so removing a label. All right, this is ZenHub. I'm going to try to reconstruct what it was that. Oh. Okay, so its state will remember the contents of that text field, but it won't update it. All right, thank you. That's very Zen. All right, back to the task at hand. Do you want to talk about pagination or configurable product details? I rather think that pagination is easier.
Yeah, I always like getting a couple of these quick ones out of the way if we can. Let's do pagination first, because I'm afraid
Gotcha.
I think configurable is going to be exciting, as it should be, and I'd hate to. So I'd rather get three versus 2. So
Yes. So I'll get right out in front of this and say that infinite scrolling is the future, but it's not the present, because there is a lot of state management to be done if that is to be usable. And ultimately, I don't think it makes a huge difference to shoppers. It's much better for reading volatile information like posts or tweets or something. And something like this, it's nice, but not necessary. So for now, I think we're going to implement a plain pagination approach, no surprises. Any questions? All right. We have ambient noise, which is like a question hanging in the air. We do this pagination. Oh no, please no ASMR. If we're doing the pagination this way, then first of all, the tasks include discovery, how to retrieve the product data from the rest, or well, GraphQL API, obviously, because that's pretty well provided, though the pagination technique is something you're going to have to look up and figure out. Then there's the implementation of a reusable pagination component. Or if you want to, you can implement something that just is stuck right into category and we'll pull it out later. But I suspect everyone on this call would like to do something reusable. First off, I think offhand, does anyone know what the GraphQL API supports in terms of pagination? Well, now you should know that that's spelled.
Give me a second. Here we have product pagination, but
yeah,
but we need a categories, I guess, right?
Yeah, that's what we're talking about, is product pagination.
That's products. That's products, true.
Yeah, filtered by a category.
Give me a second.
Hey, don't you dare.
No, here's only a pull request for improving the product pagination, which is not merged yet. It's allow you to set the page info with page size, current page, and total pages.
So you're saying a pull request on GraphQL CE?
Yep.
Okay.
I'm not sure if it will be merged soon, but yeah.
Okay.
It's approved. Okay.
All right. Would you like to tell me the?
Is
Can
here the
you
chat somewhere? Yeah, here's
in
the
the
chat.
chat somewhere?
Here's it.
Yeah. Loving that blue jeans chat. Okay, for everyone to see, improve GraphQL product pagination. So presently, GraphQL product pagination is pretty um, it's pretty primitive. I think there's the filter. Um, okay, Veni. I tried to spell Venia right like 6 times. So presently, the way that the filter works, am I going to be able to pull it up in time? Perhaps not. It doesn't include a concept of a pagination unit. And if you look at GraphQL tutorials, there's several approaches to pagination, including cursors. Cursors are nice, but since product data doesn't change that much, they're not strictly necessary here. So it's like totally basic, straightforward, page info, page size, current page, total pages. You're not going to have an offset index of records. So I think that's pretty nice, pretty straightforward. Oh, there's a dash in the Venia. I'll get there. I'll get there typing a URL. I'm so used to the Omnibar. So we are dependent upon this. And Eric, may I ask you a question? How do we indicate a dependency on an external thing?
That is a great question. I've never done that yet in ZenHub, but I wonder if that's possible. Let's see.
Well, one thing that can happen is that when I press enter, the screen goes nice and gray.
Yeah, it's not
Yeah, I
feeling
don't
well
think.
supported. It could be in the org at least.
Yeah, it's not. Yeah. So what we can do though is that we can indicate that it is locked by an issue that is a link. Perhaps that's what we do for the time being. So what we would do is create an issue that just says GraphQL pagination, GraphQL product collection query does not adequate pagination. This issue is a link to that so that, thank you, Slackbot, so that PWA issues can link it as a blocking dependency. Okay. And now I'll just copy paste the content from that. Okay, and that's 282. So now we can say that this is blocked by, well, now wait then. Two. Hey, you guys just witnessed some bureaucracy. And now we update. Okay, so let's first get that out of the way. I think what we can do is talk about how you might approach doing the UI story anyway. So any thoughts on how you might at least come up with a pagination UI component and do a fair portion of this story, even though the underlying GraphQL API doesn't adequately support pagination? I hate to put you on the spot, but Jimmy has been working with an underlying API that doesn't do the things he wants for, I think, 9 years. Is it that long?
Yeah, it sounds about right.
Yeah, so you've got experience doing something like this. How would you mock it out?
So, I mean, pagination components are kind of the same no matter what, right?
Yeah, I'm ish.
So I mean, the component itself, right, is pretty simple, right?
Uh-huh.
You know, should only be a 3 or whatever.
Yeah.
If you actually
Does it
want
seem
it
like
to.
we need to separate it?
Well, are we saying the GraphQL part's not ready yet? 'Cause,
That's what we've been saying.
yeah, so just make a component, then call it a 3, and then we can hook it up simply.
Okay, so we make the component, but it doesn't presently work. So how would it be tested?
Well, I mean, unit tests can tell whether it calls its own functions. That's all that matters.
Right,
It's going to
but
accept functions as props, and it can be tested to see if it calls those functions.
right, and the various UI states that it's supposed to be in, you can do a storybook for those. And I will confess that my recent semi-absence and busyness has meant that I'm not up to date on everyone's pull requests. But broadly speaking, do we have storybooks that we've done on all of our UI stories?
No, we have storybooks, but not for, but only for a fraction of the components out there.
Okay. So when you don't have API coverage, but you have a bunch of states that you know you want to have, like, well, first page, last page, a middle page, too many pages to show, etc. Storybook is perfect. And for those of you guys who, has anyone here not implemented a React storybook before?
Only just kind of like touch the surface of it.
Touch the surface of the storybook, like the page master, Macaulay Culkin, 1994.
I guess.
Sorry, it's been a weird week for me. I'm just having fun. It opens when you touch it. So the React storybook is similar to a testing utility, a scenario sort of catalog that lets you take a React component, and because it's a component, put it in isolation in the sort of the center of a little frame, and then plug it in, matrix style to a mock environment that puts it into a state that you want to make sure is visually sensible. So shall we look at a storybook for something right now? I don't know, is there anything? I forget if our storybooks are published, but yeah, that'd be a distraction.
James, it might be useful just a minute or two so folks, especially who've been helping us so much here, are familiar with some of this, as long as we don't go into too far.
I'm afraid that I'm going to try to launch the storybook and it won't work, and then I'll go nuts. So when you have a storybook, again, very similar to a unit test, and then often you find that you can actually reuse modules or functions between the storybook and the unit test. So be on the lookout for that. The storybook is just a web UI that lets you show a list of states for the component that you've just written, and then a lot of logging and explanation for it. What I will do is launch the PWA Studio that I was talking about. Come on. And see if we can't get some storybook going. So we've got all that going. But are there no other storybooks? I feel we did have them at some point, didn't we? We had in Peregrine, I know, in our source tests, and in perhaps price stories. Yeah, okay. So if you look at the package JSON for Peregrine, you'll see that there is a script called Storybook that is distinct from tests. And we'll go ahead and run that script now so that you can see kind of what it do. Let's see how busted it is. That'll be fun. Storybook is a bit like a development environment that is highly specialized just for looking at particular components one by one. So
I've used,
excuse me?
Sorry, I've used this thing called Pattern Lab, which seems to be like a dumber version of this.
Well, I don't know about dumber. I haven't looked at it yet. These are all kind of in their infancy. Maybe Pattern Lab is great. I'll have to take a look.
I mean, like dumber, I mean, like, it uses like mustache and stuff like that, so they're pretty logicless.
Mustache. Love it. I will take a look, though. So, again, a storybook is a UI that is based on analyzing the metadata of the things that you've made. So in the same way that there is a docs folder that our documentation thing sort of pulls out, there is a tests folder that the unit test framework looks for. There's a stories folder that Storybook looks for. And it looks like this. There is an object called stories. You generate it by naming it and then attaching it to the Node.js module. And then it has a nice sort of Fluent API where you add stories and describe the story use case. And for React components, use cases can be very small. They can be one line. Look, I instantiated the component like this. Okay, I did it like this. And I did it like this. So we have 3 stories for 3 currencies in the price, for the price component. And then we have 1 story that adds crazy custom styles. So because that story exists, when we launched Storybook, it traversed Peregrine, it saw that there were these stories for price. Oh, look. Yay. And then lastly, yeah, custom styles do indeed work. Nice going, Jimmy. So if you create a storybook for something like this, then you can implement it entirely separate and then have a very simple walkthrough for your demo that shows off the different states that it can be in. So in the absence of a full-fledged API that supports it, I would recommend doing that. And I will go ahead and add testing and documentation as appropriate. I will add specifically Storybook implementation for all states. And I would say that includes first page, last page, middle page, only one page, too many pages to count. Any other states that we want to think about?
No pages?
So no pages would be, okay, so you've got how many products do you need in your catalog before there are 0 pages of products? That's 0 products, I assume.
Right, if it doesn't turn up anything.
Well, usually when I see that, that's implemented as 1 page with nothing on it. Am I right?
Oh, yeah. Okay.
That seems right to me.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe, yeah. Are there other states that it could be in? Like it could just be blank or something?
Yeah, that's what I was imagining, but that makes more sense. I mean, it would just be a state of 1 page.
Yeah, 1 page, nothing on it. Yeah. Maybe if there's -1 products in the catalog, you get like a. So any other states or any other considerations you want to think about?
One of the interesting situations that you're going to have with this kind of component is that you have to accept as a prop, basically, how many pages to show.
How many pages to show, like between the arrows?
Yeah, how many numbers, for example, right, between the arrows, right? That's not going to be able to respond to how many, to how much width there is there, and that the available area might change in response to how wide the viewport is. You might want it to change.
Okay.
So, and you may not have that information. So there's going to be some design consideration that we have to do here.
Well, could you not use CSS to display an after child under certain circumstances?
You could. I'm not saying there's no solution. I'm saying it's going to be part of the challenge of building this thing is how to handle responsibly designing it. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, and then there's another thought that I have looking at it. Like, if there's 400 pages, obviously what you have is like dots on each side, and maybe there's a 1 so you could go back. and it's like, you're on page 102, so you see 100, 101, 102, 103, 104, and then dots, and then N, right? I'm making sense, right? Like that's not the only way to do it. It's just one basic way to do it. So would you want to be able to swipe so that if you wanted to look at like page 900 or something, that you could just go like,
I don't
and
think
Rolodex
so,
it?
is what I'm saying. It's
Yeah.
generally not. Generally, pagination thing would not be able to scroll, and so that's where this gets tricky.
There's no reason that I would know what particular page I want to be on unless it's the first or the last page. Am I wrong? I don't think I'm wrong. Eric? Samia?
No, I think that's reasonable. I'm also looking at the example that Art sent in chat as well. So I don't think so. I mean, the part that I keep thinking about is making any determination based on the number of items per page, which gets to be a bit of a sticky wicket because of the changing desktop to mobile form factors.
So I'm actually
Right.
very confused how we're even viewing this pagination because we have not discussed it internally whatsoever. So where is this
Yeah.
coming from?
Oh boy. Oh no. We're not trying to do an end run around you at all. Samia, this is just coming down from let's say.
Well, what I'm saying is that this screen is not even in the shared community prototype for
Right.
development. So where is it coming from?
This one's for me. So I'm going to take So let me. So I think we had a need to look at the components relative to the category pages. This is clearly something that's work in progress.
Yeah,
For that one, and I think we can quantify this session one. Yeah, this one's on me. Based
that's
on
okay.
what I've
I
seen.
was just confused because I saw some other
Yeah.
links to screens that are just working copies that somehow are out there, and that's a situation I would definitely like to avoid because we're iterating so much and some of it still needs to be tested.
Yep.
Now that being said, if we want to release this for development, the pagination, let's discuss it today so I can get the proper copy
Yeah.
that we all agree on out there so there's no confusion.
Yeah. And so,
Okay.
or perhaps if we feel like it's ready, maybe we pause in where we are right now because I think we've asked some good questions and give you an opportunity to take a look at it as well. That might be fair. So
Sure thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Either way, long story short, I think we haven't talked about this in a long time,
Yeah.
and I would like to make sure that we're all on the same page
Yep.
before
Okay.
and pick this up.
Okay, message received. We have already added some detail to it, but grooming is not complete because we have to make sure that the design, implementation, and the states are part of the Vinia UX story. And just to be clear, Eric may have made the prototype, but the injunction to suddenly look at configurable products and pagination came from this guy because we're thinking about quick and dirty ways to increase the coverage and the viability of a store for demo purposes in the future. And I didn't want to add something too huge. Pagination seemed achievable, and when the proper UX for it comes down, we can rapidly iterate on it if we've done it right. So it wasn't meant to be an end run around you, just to reprioritize.
Oh, that's totally fine. I mean, if you could just let me know in future if there are related items that we haven't yet reviewed that are associated with things that you would like to release for development, I can absolutely get those polished up in advance so that we don't run into this situation. I just hesitate because we haven't discussed it in a while. I haven't really discussed it with Jimmy either, and I would like us to have a chance to do that. That's my only request.
Yep. Okay.
I'm happy if this needs to be showed up by end of day today. That's something I can absolutely do, and we can still make it available for development and complete out that story. But I'd just like us to have a chance to talk about it with you guys before we do that.
Absolutely. Let's reiterate. This being a grooming session, we are not committing to implementing the stories that we groom as soon as possible. Okay. Please do not use your Friday to finish this up. Just recognize that we have set it in an order of priority that that's just something that you can do during grooming, and we needed to have some sort of picture, but by no means do we mean for it to be normative. And since we haven't done this before, it's our mistake for not making that clear at the outset.
Oh, it's totally fine. I was a little bit, it's because of also a parallel conversation on the PWA channel where people are somehow now having access to screens that I don't know how that happened, because there is a working copy that's just internal, and we still need to review things. And I thought that maybe this was part of that. So maybe I had a stronger reaction than necessary just because of the circumstance of it. But yeah, absolutely, we can talk about it, and I can get it finished up as quickly as possible. No problem.
Sure. No strong reaction. I think it's reasonable to keep us in check. Okay, so moving past pagination, leaving it in the for grooming state, and mindful of time, we have 15 minutes left, and always want sessions like this to be open for community contribution or community to lead us into a different direction. We have 3 more things we could potentially discuss. Configurable product details, which I think shares in common with the pagination, Soumya, that there isn't completely finalized UX on that, right?
No, product configuration is pretty finalized. I mean, it's whatever we have on the PD and the edit card, right? That's what you're talking about?
Yeah, that's another one that we tried to reprioritize. Well, okay. Shall we talk about that?
Sure.
All right. Couple considerations. One, the Venia catalog has a bunch of configurable products in it. You might have encountered this when you tried to go to a product, add it to cart, and get a 400, and then looked and inspected the JSON. It said, dude, you got to pick a variant. So partly because of that, the fact that we have that as a catalog, and partly because I think it is crucial to an effective demo of e-commerce features, we're going to push on getting configuration going. Now, I think this is a stretch. There's a lot of little bits to this, and clearly there's an amount of metadata on each configuration option that would let you decide between swatches or numeric things or et cetera. So this is not small, but let's talk about what we could do that is. So first of all, GraphQL, does it give us enough information about product configuration options?
Yes.
It does?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, if the question, I'm sorry, I missed part of it. If your question is GraphQL gives us a product configuration option, yes.
Okay. Hold on a second. I just realized. Of course, we don't have any things. Let me do something real quick so that I can have GraphQL going. I think that my problem is that I've got Docker running and not the right stuff. The Docker and no one look. It's always nice to have a working GraphQL environment ready, so I'm starting my local instance so that we can place queries against it and understand what's possible for us to observe. But while that's getting started, what are some considerations here? First of all, I would like to say we need to do some discovery on what metadata allows us to choose option display. Does that seem reasonable?
It seems to me, but again, I would defer to people with more expertise on that one.
And I would say one thing that certainly can be done is the implementation of presentation components receiving props not binding to API data. Why did I say present? And binding to API data. Hello, everybody. that implement common options selector UI. So that would include, let's talk about how much could go into one story. And let's actually go ahead and view this image if we can. So looking at this thing, actually I'm going to move over here. We've got a numeric value selector, e.g. size. What else we got? We got color swatches. And we got just plain text values. And then all options show out of stock indicator. And there you go. A lot of different things. I mean, we could potentially break these into stories for each of those little options. But again, knowing the talent level and the abstraction level of the staff that we have here, I'm sure everyone wants to do the reusable thing and make some base components that take a callback to render the UI or whatever. So I think that achieving these three things can be done within the scope of a single story, especially if that's done in isolation from provisioning it with API data. So perhaps I would say that can be separated into another story. Much like the pagination thing is implementing these different types of paginators and then later binding them. Does that make sense?
So I think that we already have option selection UI. Am I wrong?
Like implemented?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't think so.
I definitely built it.
Oh, well, okay.
And it should be on the product page already, I think. It may have been tossed out when we switched to actual live data, but those things definitely exist in Venia.
It may have been. Do you have something working
Let me look
right now?
quick. I'm gonna check real quick. See.
Sure. Yeah. Well, while you're doing that, let's say that there's a certain amount of information we already know that these things need, and in the usual pattern of container to presentation component, we can just design our props however is the most convenient to us, and then later when there is binding to GraphQL data or whatever else, then we can implement the container component that feeds data into it and then grabs events out of it and interprets them and feeds them back. So
yeah, it's called the product options component.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Well, we got a storybook.
There's one for regular options, there's one for tiles, and there's one for swatches. So
are there storybooks for them, or?
I'm looking right now. I don't think there are.
Well, then, gosh, how do I know what they look like?
I don't know.
Yeah. So sorry about that. I should have known, and I think what maybe that means that we include is a evaluation of option selector prototype that do exist for code reuse. And so just, I guess, might as well do that exploration now. We've got product options. Yeah. And then we got swatch lists and tile lists. Jimmy, you did all the stuff. Now, no, you're not. That's from the monorepo, but this stuff is from prior to monorepo, right?
Yeah, this stuff is from prior to live data even. I think it's prior even to root components. So this was pretty early on.
Okay. Well, then
But
let's definitely
should still work.
add to the story the sort of evaluation of those prototypes.
Okay.
It's Jimmy code, so you should be able to mount it pretty quick. Oh, okay. Alex, thank you so much for your help. Have a good weekend. Sorry, I saw in chat that he has to leave. Okay, let's see if we can't nail estimation for this so that I can yield the floor back to Eric, who probably actually wanted to run this in an organized manner. First of all, does everyone agree that we ought to separate the implementation of the individual component with all of the UX and the implementation of data provisioning to them into separate stories?
Yeah, sounds good.
I agree with myself too. So we'll grab these things and make a separate story for them. And I'm just making a note that we'll do that. And let's say we're going to make it clearer that implement configurable product options selector UI for Venia. Okay. Presentation UI for Venia. Okay. And then now that we have removed the aspect of it where we are checking what's possible in GraphQL and instead just making the assumption that there's coverage to retrieve the product data, how can we size it? Why is that there? Maybe I shouldn't use so much emphasis. Okay, so we've got, again, evaluation of the code that does exist that we made in early drafts for reuse. Then we have the implementation of the components that are shown here. I see 3. Samia, are there more screens that show more options?
That screen should be scrollable, actually. Let me just check the markup really quick. 1 second.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's multiple pieces to that. Yep.
There's a quantity piece that's currently not visible in the frame.
Quantity is important, though, out of scope, because everything needs a quantity, and this is for configurable options.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would. So in the markup, I just have 3 sort of parameters of configuration. But the idea is that the same type of selection mechanism, either this or a drop down, could be extended to anything that you had a binary or a single selection on, pretty much.
Right. Is there multi-select stuff? I mean, it's still a separate story. I'm just curious.
Not in the Venia example, there is not.
Okay. So then we have 3 things to implement. Thank you. We've got a numeric selector, color swatches, and text values. All of them ought to show metadata as appropriate. For instance, we got a size guide. I don't know whether that goes in the option selector itself or whether you want to just leave that off for later injection. But I would like it if, for instance, the swatches did have tooltips that showed their names, because everyone loves the names of colors that people make up. And then there's just the regular selector. So they need to show out of stock indicator, and there's also in my view, there also ought to be a notion of whether you will have such a thing as unselected state, or whether you begin with a pre-selected state that somebody has to change. There's pros and cons to each. Been in this space before, but I'll leave it up to implementer. I would say we can leave it up to the implementer to decide. What do you guys think of that? And not the least because it is 10:59.
Yeah, going forward, I mean, I think since we have most of the UI there, a lot of what has to be done is making decisions or proposals for decisions about that kind of stuff. So I think that stuff can be handled in PR review.
Yeah, and then much later we can, yeah, I think you're absolutely right. So size, let's roll the dice. All right.
This is feeling pretty sizable. I'm not even
Yeah.
going to start off with one.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a 5 to an 8 probably.
Okay. Without any data binding?
Okay.
I mean, bearing in mind, without data binding, there's really, I don't think there's actually any requirement that this thing go into a Venia page. Like acceptance criteria for me, and let me go ahead and make that clear. So the AC here, are just that Venia prototype selectors, go away, are implemented from mock, and then test coverage and test coverage exists. Storybook states exist for selected, out of stock, and metadata display. Storybook implemented, stories implemented for demonstration. And I would say components accept props for state, for internal display state, and provide hooks for event listeners. That's a pattern we're all familiar with. So none of this says it's integrated into the product detail page, and I just want to make that clear. Hopefully that shrinks the story somewhat.
Yep, that's the name.
What do we think?
Based on Jimmy's starting, feels more like a 5 to 8. We've made it a little bit more simple.
Yeah, I'm saying I would make it a 5 and go for that, and then do the data binding.
Okay. Now that I'm in annotation mode, I actually don't know how to get out. Boy, this is being recorded, right? Okay, so if we agree that it's a 5, which I think we do, then we'll call it set and we'll call it groomed. Okay.
Yep. Okay, that's my expectation.
Okay, so I didn't hear that too well. So okay,
and as far as will this essentially bring a configurable product through the card experience? Will the creation of this? And the short answer is yes.
Yeah. Like step 1 is to implement the UI in isolation, and then step 2.
This story is about UI for isolation, or is it full story?
No, there's a second story. There's a second story that we add that is also has to take place. Since this is a 5, I think that second story needs some external help because it'll probably also be a 5, which is to make sure that there's API coverage and that there's actions and reducers that manage configuration states, and then and then lastly that there's a container component which binds. So we're over time on grooming. I think we'll create that story. But yeah, I mean, the stories separately deliver value in terms of tuning up for the user, but the scenario is only accomplished by combining the 2 stories.
Okay, let's discuss it separately.
Okay, cool. So
that's my comment. So in my understanding, at some point, so my understanding was that all stories that we have, they have business values by its own. So this story, for me, this UI story doesn't have business value by its own. So, like,
okay.
Well, it's okay. Keep it. Let's just synchronize again after the grooming on how we do grooming, how we put stories. It's just a bit different from what I thought how it works, but it doesn't matter that much. Sorry, I just didn't understand it because I thought that the story finalized it, but in acceptance criteria I didn't say it.
Well, we can be fairly nimble here. I mean, we can take the two stories that we just created. I haven't implemented this. I haven't written the second down, but we can take the two stories that we've created and easily combine them into one. But we made the separation in order to mirror the architectural separation between container code and presentation code that exists in the Peregrine type of implementation that is the best practice for React. So in the reason that you do that is for code reuse of the presentation part. And so I would say that there's two types of business value being delivered. The container component delivers the business value of having actions and reducers wired up in Venia for processing the configuration. So that directly contributes to the merchant and the shopper the ability to do configuration. And it also gives developers hooks to put in their own components. So it delivers value to developers and to shoppers, of course, for completing a configurable product scenario. The presentation story, the one that we're looking at now, confers two types of business value as well. It adds to the toolbox that developers have when implementing UI, so it increases their efficiency and it adds options for them to drop in things, and of course it completes the story. So in isolation, each of them adds business value to one or another persona, either Freddie, the front-end developer, or Sheila, the shopper. But together, obviously, they're more than the sum of their parts, you know?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you all for time for grooming.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to go ahead, and as soon as we get offline, I'm going to make sure that I write the container story for this. No objections?
Not at all. Take a look at it, and we'll review it today. So I appreciate you doing that.
Go for it.
Okay. Thank you very much all for your participation. I will unshare the screen. Eric, do you have any final business?
Always, but for today, no, just a thank you. So thank you for thank you for covering and kind of adding the detail that we needed for these stories. I think we made good progress on the few we did cover, including closing out the order confirmation piece, which I thought was good. But yeah, no, thank you. I appreciate everybody's support and kind of staying on here longer. But for those who are later, have a great weekend. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you very, very much, guys.
Thanks, everybody.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye.
See you guys.
Bye bye.